Great. Well, welcome everybody. I'm Geoff Barnard. I'm one of the steering group for the South East Climate Alliance, and welcome to our latest knowledge sharing session. These happen every now and then. There's a little burst of them in the next month or so, and they're all designed to just get that kind of interchange of ideas and inspiration between different SECA groups. And I'll give a pre-announcement kind of right now of the next one, which is going to be on the 28th of March. And this is all about climate communications. And we're going to have a training session on the very impressive Britain Talks Climate communication kind of approach, which has been pioneered and is being rolled out. So if you're at all kind of involved in climate communications, I think you'll find this quite inspirational. But tonight we're going to be focusing on the climate emergency scorecards, and I'm really delighted to welcome Annie Pickering, who's going to be involved. I guess most of you will know by now that last autumn they completed the mammoth and indeed heroic task, I'd say, of scoring every council in the country on their climate action plans. And I think the more I observe this, the more I think what an extraordinary effort that is. And I think it's pretty unheard of to do something like that, almost entirely with volunteer effort to such a high standard. So I've doffed my cap. I doff my cap again, Andy, to you and the team and all the volunteers, which we've got a couple here. So welcome, Annie. And some of you will recognize Annie, because she's been at the last two SECA gatherings in Brighton. Lives in Brighton, I think, or based in Brighton, yeah. So the evening will be in kind of two parts. The first part, Annie's going to be sharing the results of the scorecards in the Southeast, and we'll have a chance to kind of comment on that. And in the second part, it's kind of talking about the so what. How can we use these scorecards to actually not just shine a light on what councils are doing, but to really spark change? We're lucky to have Lucy Bolton here, who's from Rother District Council, who's been involved in some of the kind of the courses after the scorecards, and Lucy will be talking a bit about how she's been using it in her council in hopefully a construct. Last time I heard, you were quite positive about it. And then there'll be a chance for a Q&A at the end. But please, could you, if you have questions that crop up during the course of the thing, pop them in the chat, and we can, and I'll do my best at spotting them as they come through. But over to you, Annie, to kick off and talk us through the results.
Thank you so much. And yeah, basically thanks to all of our 200 volunteers who made this possible. I'm going to cover a little about what the scorecards are and like how we got there, but I recognize that we've got volunteers on the call, people who have attended the SECA events before. So I will go through these really quickly, but we will share the slides around. So if you are like a bit new and you're like, whoa, I never knew all of this, you can look back at these at another time. But yeah, I'm kind of hoping to give you a little bit of hints and tips on kind of like how to look at the scorecards and how to make most use of our website. And then a little bit on how you can use the scorecards to lobby in your own council. But it sounds like Lucy will maybe kind of give some of that real life examples in the best way possible. So a brief summary of kind of where we've come from. So we've been around for almost 5 years now, although this is the first time we've done the action scorecards. Last time we looked at the Council Climate Action plans. So the mission that we have with the scorecards is to inform residents and increase their understanding of what councils can do on climate. Whilst we're doing stuff on climate, it's also a huge transparency and accountability exercise. We're providing a benchmark for council climate action that anyone can look at and be like, okay, that is what good climate action could or should look like. Also, as it's all public, we want councils to be able to use this to look at where they can improve or where they can learn from others. And finally, it's about encouraging and getting that support from the national government so that councils can go further and faster on climate action. I'll tell you about the scores later, but in general, council scored quite low. And I think because it's low across the whole board, we think that really clearly shows that there are clearly national barriers at play. that need to be changed at a national level. Whilst there are stuff that councils can do, it's not just about what councils can do. There's also other factors involved. So briefly, what did we do? So we assessed every UK local authorities. It's 388. I think that includes combined authorities across 7 sections. So listed there are the 7 sections. Just to give you an example, the transport questions, for example, looked at things about, mainly the questions were like area wide, although there were always some questions on council only actions. So like, is the council's vehicles that use themselves, are they transitioning to electric or not? We looked at bus ridership in the area. We looked at active travel. We looked at whether they're approving kind of new major roads and air quality and various things. Biodiversity, we looked at tree cover, the kind of green flag award of their parks, whether they're using pesticides, quite varied. It took a while. So it took us a good, how did I write? Yeah, like a short year to create the methodology. And we created it with a team of, well, in consultation with over 90 different organisations, councils and residents. We published that methodology in November 2022 now, so yeah, quite a while ago, and started the first mark in January with a team of 200 volunteers, so January last year. And the reason it takes a while is because we have a 3-stage marking process. So we use volunteers first mark, we then turn every council. Can you guys still hear me?
Yeah, coming through clear.
We get every council to they get a chance to see the right of reply, so they comment on whether we've missed things, not missed things, and how that has worked. And then we have the final stage, which is a much more smaller group of volunteers that look at the first mark and the council's right of reply and give the final score. We published that in October 2023. All of it's public online, and it covers what we marked, how we marked, the point scoring system, because it's not just a simple yes, no. Some questions matter more than others, and some sections matter more than others. So you can have a look at that in a bit more detail. But maybe what is more exciting is, what do the results actually show? So I'm going to give you the national picture first, and then we'll look at what that means for the Southeast. So the average scores across the nations for councils were in the 30s, notably lower in Northern Ireland. And that little line at the bottom is just to note that in general, well, not in general, it is a fact, that no Welsh and Scottish councils scored below 15%. And we think that is primarily because there is lots of policy in Wales and Scotland which is supportive of climate action, which meant councils in Wales, automatically got the mark for certain things, whereas they didn't in England because that isn't yet a policy. So on the single-use plastic, for example, Scotland, when we did the marking, had a much tougher ban on single-use plastic than in England. So all Scottish councils already got that mark, but not everyone in England did. Very, very top level analysis here. Only 41 councils scored over 50%, although some councils did score over 80% in some sections. And I think when people see this, sometimes they're shocked that it's so low, but then they're also like, well, that's the reality. Like, I'm sure you're all getting annoyed at your councils or working with them to improve in various areas. And we all know that as a country, like, carbon emissions are pretty high. So it would be strange if there was one council getting 100%, because then you'd suddenly expect their emissions to be super low, both kind of area wide and within the council. And we know that isn't the case. So I think it's kind of quite an accurate representation of where we're at. Like, there is some really good work happening, but more work needs to happen. So these are the average scores across council type. And we always present the council types in different lists because they have different powers. And I should have said, some questions apply to other councils, whereas they don't apply to others. So for planning, there's only like 2 or 3 questions to county councils because they're not planning authorities, whereas district councils are. Now that bottom line is the Southeast range of scores, and I'll show you the average for the Southeast on the other slide. And I think it's really important to always see the average score next to the range, because I think it's somewhat heartening to show that, okay, there are some councils that are only scoring 9%, but actually there are some councils doing a lot better, and therefore it must be possible for some of those lower scoring councils to do better. And you can see that the range of scores in the Southeast, it is always just a little bit higher than the kind of UK-wide range, which I think is somewhat positive. And only at county level are you reaching the highest range from other councils. So this is the regional averages. As you can see, England, the Southeast is slightly higher there. We are going to look in a lot more detail at the Southeast, but to be honest, there's not really anything more I can say. What I'm going to do is share this beautiful blog that I think maybe Sally wrote, maybe others wrote, which goes into detail what the results for the scorecard show for the Southeast. There's a lot of information there. I suggest you click on it now, and I'm going to give you a few minutes to read it. Don't try and read all of it. Ignore the beginning bit on like what the scorecards are and where they came from, and maybe pick either a section you want to read on, or just read the beginning bit. And I'm just going to give you a couple minutes to have a read of that, and then we'll kind of see what you think about the scores, and what your kind of experience has been of the scorecards since they've launched, before we move on to how to use them. And now we're just gonna hear from people. So yeah, are you surprised by any of those results? Have you heard of these scorecards before? What do you think of the results when they first came out? What do you thought now you kind of know a little bit more? Kind of open the floor for anyone to talk, really.
It was, I think when we looked at Thanet, which scored really highly on energy efficiency, I think that's really good to see with the private rented sector, because they've got energy efficiency there, which is most probably starting with insulation, etc. So they scored 68%, which is the highest scoring. And I think, you know, we have to start looking at local community energy networks, and even mapping them out now. We're doing that as a council, Hastings Council. We're talking about that already, mapping them out, even though we haven't got any climate action officers. So, you know, we're slowly going through things, but it doesn't mean we're taking any action at the moment, but we have got some kind of more structure at the moment. And just one more thing with Hampshire, it scored the highest on active travel, which is really good to see, with Active Travel England scoring them at 26%. So they've obviously got cycling infrastructure in place, and there's more people out of their cars and using walking and cycling. And that's one of the key questions at the moment. How are we going to get people out of cars? Can we get them to use other forms of transport, public transport, buses? And we're trying to look at that in Hastings at the moment with Stagecoach and the buses. And can people use alternative transport for those local journeys? You know, those 20-minute journeys, can they walk? Can they use buses? So yeah, that's just some.
Thanks for that. And I think maybe it's nice to add there that a reason why quite a few of those transport questions are in there are like indicators of how you could encourage people using their cars less for the short journeys. So the idea of like parking charges, school streets and things like that, like them in and of themselves aren't the solution, right? But they're kind of steps towards encouraging other ways of traveling. And the Active Travel England scores is a new thing that the national government have done. So please don't ask me about their methodology, but it's really hard to score active travel. And that is like some indication of where councils are at. Go for it, Tony.
Yeah, just a quick thing, because we mentioned something offline, and I think I'll write some detail about that, which will hopefully be helpful. So I was saying that Horsham District Council is a bit of an outlier, and it doesn't seem to be being reflected in the scores. What it does isn't reflected in the scores, in the biodiversity section at least. I think I can see where the issues of arise there and arisen there, and I'd like to write to you, probably outlining them. One point, though, to bear in mind is that actually I'm quite aware of a negative consequence if we're not careful. I think Horsham are actually quite in the lead when it comes to biodiversity, but they're actually shown as one of the poorest because of the score. Now, yes, we can look at that and change it, that's fine. But this could be leading to a negative consequence, and that some people who are working a great deal with Horsham, imagining that they're doing all sorts of the right things and Horsham are doing well, have looked at what they've done, looked at the Horsham score, and they're saying, well, in spite of all our work, Horsham is scoring very badly. Is it worth working with them at all? So my thought on that is, yes, okay, but what we probably need to do is respond fairly quickly to show whether this is a reasonable reflection of Horsham, in which case they need to be named and shamed, or is there something else in the conversation that we can have? Now, maybe they didn't reply properly, maybe their website isn't very good. There could be all sorts of things we could discuss. But I think we need to be very aware of negative consequences if people imagine their score is not really reflective of where they stand.
Yeah, and I think there's an important point to recognise that we want local people to give the local nuance. So we can't score on everything and we don't cover all questions. And what we've tried to pick are the actions that, like, broadly speaking, most councils have the power to do. And broadly speaking, they are achievable and possible and impactful on sort of, climate ecological action. So it would be really useful for you to provide that local knowledge, be like, oh, you scored, not so well in this scorecard, but the reason is because the methodology didn't look at these 3 big projects that Horsham are doing, which are great. And they might be the only council in the UK doing that, and that's great. And they can keep doing that. They might want to think about whether there is evidence on these other questions where they didn't score the marks. Is it because they didn't respond to the right reply? Is the information not publicly available? And making sure, like, the good thing is there'll be another scorecard. So it may well change next time around. Mark. And then we'll hear from Gabe.
Mark and Gabe have got their hands up. So Mark, do you want to go first? Because you discovered the hands up symbol first, so you get a prize for that.
Thank you very much. Sorry I was late. A question which might be answered if I'd read it. Where do we want to be in 10 years' time? Would we want all the councils to be hitting 80%? Is that how you see this, or is that a 5-year target? Or that's the sort of question: where are we going? Where do we hope to end up, and on what time scale might we want to do that in?
Yeah, that's a really good question. All the questions that we include in the scorecards are things that we, as far as we are aware, councils could do now and have the power. So we're not really saying we want council to be 80% in 5 years' time. We're saying it's a climate emergency and want you to be doing everything in your power as soon as possible. However, we recognise there are national barriers in place, and there are some difficulties in local areas. And it's really hard to correlate actions with exact emissions reductions. There's a whole issue around how councils are reporting on emissions and national emissions. So we're more saying is we want, all of this done as soon as possible, as much as it's done. But we recognise that it won't just be councils that will need to make those changes. It is kind of wider things in a lot of cases. And we don't say that this methodology, if councils did it, they'd be at net zero. We just say they would be making good progress because obviously there's so many other factors that come into play.
Gabe, do you want to go next? And then I think Scilla had a hand up.
Thanks. Just a quick one on how can you have a negative number? I maybe missed that bit. And then what do we do about multiple tier authorities? How do we evaluate who's in charge of what? And how can we work together?
Yeah, so there are, I think it's 4 or 5 questions where there are penalty marks. So councils lose marks for doing something such as having particularly high PM2 levels, or if they approved a new oil or coal field or something like that. So that negative mark is taken off that section score. And yeah, it's unlikely. There are some councils that score negatively in the section overall, but normally it just reduces their section score overall. And all the questions, and I said it earlier, I'm sorry if you missed it, the questions are changed slightly for councils depending on their powers. So for example, like I said it before, I try and use a different example. District councils are scored a lot less on transport because they have a lot fewer powers on some of those issues, whereas county councils or single like unitary authorities are. We recognise that some of the actions do need all councils to play their part, but and that's why we always show the results, and I'll show you the website soon. Been splitting out between the 5 different councils because it's unfair to compare different councils with different councils with different powers in exactly the same boat. I've probably got time for one more comment before I want to show you guys the website briefly.
Stella, have you still got a comment?
Yes, I just wanted to say for a start, thank you so much to CUK for all this really hard work to produce all this information. I'm noticing in Mid Sussex District Council that probably looked at the graphs where they might come in the middle-ish, and then they're rather congratulating themselves, or they might have come like in one area, biodiversity, they scored very well. So I rather suspect they're not doing as much as Horsham, but so then they feel rather sort of content, really. They've only got maybe 30% or 32% in something, but because it looked on the graph as though they're not doing as badly as some others, and it's quite interesting how it sort of psychologically how it seems to be playing out. And I just thought that's something to be aware of, really, and think about how you can kind of combat that.
Yeah, I mean, I think it's kind of evidence of like where we're all at, and we all need to be doing a lot more, but it kind of gives some priority where they have done stuff. And in our, we try and just provide the information and we give the number, and we provide graphics for councils, and they show both the highest and lowest score of a council on the same graphic within a section. And we want, again, the local people to be like, okay, you've scored really well in this section, but hang on, what about this other section? What are you doing here? Or like, hey, district council, you've done really well, but the county council have done really badly. Like, what's happening here, and how can you help each other out? It's a tool to lead to further work. The numbers in and of itself are not all that there is. I'm going to share my screen now because I just want to show you the website. This is our website. Here's all the data. There are some really useful things I just really want to quickly show you. We've got quite a few filters here, so you can look at the information by particular regions, the political control, the population of an area, and kind of the urban ruralness along any of these 5 lists. So whether it's a single tier councils, district councils, county councils, or others. The really useful tool is the comparison tool. So if someone could give me a name of a council in the southeast that they would like to look at the score a little bit more, we'll have a look at that and compare it against some others. So just,
how about Horsham compared to Mid Sussex, sort of next door councils?
Yes, and they're both districts, so that's perfect. So for every council, they have this page, which has a little bit of background information here. And then you have their score. So 28% overall. It's lower than the average. In fact, all of their sections, I think, are lower than the average. But really importantly, you can see exactly how they scored. So have they completed extensive retrofitting of their work? Not many district councils got full marked here because the criteria was 2-tiered. They need to do this and this to get the point. But really usefully, you can see the evidence that shows they got the mark. And I hope this one is a good one. Okay, it's a scheme of completed projects, public sector decarbonisation fund. So it's their council buildings or things. So by Horsham, there we go. That's what they've done. And that's what they're getting the mark for. So if you want to kind of question the scores a bit more, that's really useful. We've got all the evidence links, both as well for national data and for freedom of information requests we sent. So we wanted to compare Horsham with Mid Sussex. You can compare up to 5 councils. So let's just start with these 2. They're not wildly different, but a bit different. So yeah, biodiversity is the one where there's quite a big difference, but also collaboration and engagement. So I'll look at that one. and you can look at individual ones. Okay, so it looks like Horsham have published an up-to-date climate action plan report, and it's easy to read. It looks like Mid Sussex haven't, so that's one of the reasons for that score difference. They've both done the same things there. The Horsham apparently doesn't look at how they're going to work with residents most affected by climate change and engage with them. Mid Sussex does, and neither of them there was evidence for this. So that's engaging with cultural institutions, and neither have passed a motion to ban high carbon advertising and sponsorship within their area. And here it shows you the number of councils that got full marks in that question. So say we want to look at high carbon advertising and sponsorship. If you click on this, it then shows you in order all the district councils that got the mark in that question and the links to the evidence. So if you're interested in one particular area, that is quite useful. Other useful things on our site, which is what I'm going to cover today, but in slightly less detail, is this page. So it's how to use the scorecards. And we've got this really useful document, which is like 15 key things that we think councils can do to improve their climate action that aren't so expensive and so resource heavy. And I really would encourage you to check your council's score against these 5 actions, 15 actions, because if your council has done all of these, that's quite, you know, going in the right direction. If they haven't, these are kind of lowish hanging fruit that you might want to focus on. We've provided some comms response. Oh, you can watch the latest training of how to use a scorecard, but I'm here today, so you don't need that. There is this campaigner's guide on how to use the action scorecards. And a little plug here, we will be running the local climate academy. Here we go. Which is, yeah, much more detailed training on what the scorecards show, how your council works, and how you can use the scorecards to influence your council for change. So yeah, they're the resources that we have, and do make use of the methodologies in detail here as well as it being there. If you want to kind of dive into details exactly how we scored stuff, it's here, like the weighting for different sections and things like that. It's all pretty detailed. I'm going to go back to my slides now. Oh no. Let's do interview. So in the next few slides, I'm kind of showing you in a bit more detail what is on the website and kind of how you might want to use the scorecard. So I already touched upon it there. This is the first 9 of the 15 actions that councils can do. So one of them is like, information is easily accessible. Do they have a climate action plan update? And can you find it on their website? One of the other ones is, yeah, electrical vehicle fleet. So what percentage of the council owned vehicles are using electric rather than fuels at the moment? Has the council supported a car sharing scheme across the area? So these are relatively, you know, these are actions that are important, but we're not asking them to spend millions of pounds necessarily, but they can have an impact. So yeah, it's useful to look at these and then compare your council's score. And on the document it says, like, for councils that have scored this or completed this action, check out, can I remember any of the council numbers? I think this one, community buying, is building and heating, question 9 or 10. So you can see if your council scored a mark on that one. And these are the remaining ones that we ask councils to do. This one has been in the news a little bit. Oh no, not quite this one, but it's linked to it, about making net zero homes. So making sure all new builds are built to net zero standards. That is something that councils have the power to do and put into their local plans. But sadly, and the planning inspectorate has to improve the local plans. And for some reason, they sometimes give different approvals. So I think it's Bath in North East Somerset, it was approved, but up in Lancaster, and that hasn't always been approved. But it is something that councils are able to do, and we would encourage them to go forward if it is a time when they're reviewing their local plan. those who are in the biodiversity, so stopping the use of pesticides in the council-only operations, and mowing less in order to enhance biodiversity in the local area. So yeah, pick which ones you're most interested in, perhaps, or the ones that your council can have the impact on. I quite like the vegetarian school meals one. I mean, it's a big change, which would take time to make the change happen, but we're not asking for like additional money or resources. We're just asking for menus to serve different foods. I mean, there are councils that are providing complete vegetarian meals every week at every schools, but that isn't the case everywhere. So as I showed you, this is in the campaign guides, but these are some kind of questions to get you thinking when you're kind of looking at your score and thinking how you might want to get your council to improve. Which section did your council score lowest on? And maybe that's where you want to start. But maybe, as in the case in Horsham, you think there might be some different reasons as maybe you want to start somewhere else. I've already said it, but has your council done those top 10, top 15 improvements? Because I think that's another good place to start. And also, as we looked at briefly, look at which questions your neighbouring councils has done. There's always definitely a bit of friendly competition between nearby councils. So maybe you know that X council thinks they're really good at transport, but actually the council just across the road has done a lot better. And that might be somewhere to start. Worth thinking about who has the power to make these changes and how can you influence them. That is kind of what is covered in the campaigner's guide, and I'm not going to go into too much detail because I'm sure amongst you guys you've got a much stronger knowledge on this, but we provide guidance on how you might want to host a public event, ask a question to full council, talk directly to your councillor, and some ideas on how to talk to your councillor. And now what I want to do now, briefly, because I realise some of you might already know this, but for those that don't, I want to kind of cover in a bit more detail about how council decisions are made, and therefore how you can use council, the scorecards within council processes to affect change, and also where some of those kind of stumbling blocks might be and why you might be facing some challenges and how we can overcome those. So it's worth thinking about the different places where decisions are made and who is in those rooms. So sadly, most councils have cabinet systems. So it's a much smaller group of councillors that are making most of the decisions, and often things are just kind of rubber stamped, but not always at full council. So who can you talk to that's in the cabinet? Sometimes decisions can be delegated to council officers, and that's why it's really good to have a good relationship with them. But it really depends on the decision and on the issue. I don't expect you to fully understand this, but this is just an example of the different meetings and committees that a council might have. So you might want to think about where to go. So the building committee might be worth talking to you about decarbonisation, or you might want to focus just talking directly to the cabinet. There's an interesting thought, and I don't think people have done it enough yet, but like using the scrutiny and audit committees more to be like, okay, you've got a climate action plan. You said you're going to do all these things. Climate Emergency UK say you haven't, and actually we can't see your climate action plan update on your website. Where are you at? Like from a process perspective, what can happen there? These are the main ways that council policy changes, just to kind of give a little bit more kind of detailed information. I think many of you might all kind of already know this through practice, but I've never sat back and thought, oh yeah, this is how it works. So often cabinet members are like, I want to do this thing. Ex staff member, write me how I can make this happen, like electrify the council's cars. And they have this report, they bring it to the cabinet, and they, you know, accept, reject, or improve. And therefore, the officers can go away and do that. Or a councillor might bring a motion to full council where they can either amend, approve, or reject. So we saw that a lot with climate emergency motions. They came as motions to councils that were then approved. And often that motion is kind of top level, right? And the officer will then go away and write the detailed stuff of like, okay, this is actually how we're going to do it and what we're going to do it. And I think with climate emergency declarations, we've really seen that, like, yeah, we'll approve a motion, like easy peasy. oh, it means we have to do all of these hard things around climate, and well, I'm not so sure. Maybe we'll water down the plan or we'll approve it, but it is questionable how much it's enacted. Or there might be changes to circumstances, such as legal stuff or other things. So I touched upon this before, but just a reminder, there are ways in which members of public, you can influence council decision-making process. So you can ask a question at meetings, some you have to make sure when, hand a petition into full council and at some committees. I don't know much about requesting a scrutiny review, but that is a possibility in some councils in some ways. And there are things that you can do if you've got councillors on your side. And annoyingly, it's a little bit different for every council. So I would find your council's constitution on the website and work out what is allowed and what isn't, because there's sadly no one size fits all, although there's kind of general stuff. It does vary a little bit. So that's kind of like the process, but we kind of totally recognize that process isn't everything, right? Like you can have the best evidence ever, you can have the best understanding of a council, but ultimately it's about persuading, and it's about contacting the right person at the right time and in the right way. And I'm sure you've all had experiences perhaps of just like shouting at a councillor or like telling them something isn't necessarily enough or going to work, and especially if it's not within their remit. But if you can be someone who is supportive and providing information we hadn't yet thought of, or helping to provide something, that might be useful. And I think these are the key questions. So as much as our scorecards are useful, I think you can only really use them if you're also considering how you answer these questions of what do your council or particular councillor want and what don't they want. So based on that, I just want to hear from a couple of people now. What do you think stops or influences councillors taking action? Or kind of, you could put it the other way, what encourages councils to take action? So I don't know if you've got experiences from where you are, but yeah, please give me some examples of what influences councillors to take action or otherwise.
Sarah?
Yeah, I'm not muted. I think with building up to the elections, councillors our councillor Rushmore, Labour are likely to do a little bit better. So it looks like our cabinet, we might end up getting more Rushmore more Labour councillors than Conservatives. So the Rushmore councillors are working very hard at the moment. Unfortunately, that doesn't seem to help the climate because they're obsessed with car drivers and parking and potholes and not active travel. So what was the question again? I think election time is a key period. And maybe we should get our own election material out with the groups that we're working with. So like I'm with Blackwater Valley Friends of the Earth, and so I'm thinking of almost putting our flyers through letterboxes at the same time as the councillors are doing it, to just say vote climate, not necessarily in a Chris Packham kind of way. I'm not talking about his campaign. I like his campaign, but you know, you make your decision. I'm not telling you how to vote, but vote climate, and take the political parties out of it. Anyway, I'll shut up because I might have gone.
Yeah, I think there's quite a lot of work around other organisations kind of getting climate to the agenda, but focusing back on, what do councillors care about? You're right, around election time, they do care about public perception, what voters think, and also on a more personal level, these councillors want to keep their seat. So for whatever reason, I don't know if enjoy is the right word, but they want to remain being a councillor. They must hold some pride, some interest, some care of the community around there. So thinking about how can you tap into that when you're talking, engaging with them.
Well, my campaigns 2 years ago was 20's plenty and stopping sewage pollution, and no one was talking about sewage pollution maybe 2+ years ago, and now everyone's talking about it now, even the Tories. But I think I think it's what people want. You know, you're talking to people at the doorstep and finding out what they want. That's the key issue. And I think with 20's plenty, many people want it around schools and residential areas because we've had not just accidents, but near misses. And the Sussex County Council are just waiting for people to die before they can actually action it. And we've taken the petition to county now. And it's all part of that strategy of slowing down, less car use, actively traveling, and, you know, using other forms of transport as well, especially around schools with the school streets. It's really congested, it's very polluted, and everyone wants that. And I went to a sustainable transport meeting in Eastbourne, and everyone from every district said, please, we want 20-mile-an-hour areas. Everyone wanted it, but county aren't listening. So just look at who's in county at the moment, all right? Governing.
Yeah, and I think what you said there is important about kind of hot topics. You know, councils want to suddenly see they care about 20's plenty because everyone else is doing it. And that's, you know, arguably in a good way what happened with climate emergency declarations. Lots of councils were doing it. They're like, oh, well, I guess we should also do it. You know, you don't want to be the odd one left out there. Anyone else want to come forward with what stops or influences councillors from taking action?
Tony, you had your hand up earlier?
Yeah, it's kind of was covered by the last one, because one reason given, I think you were there as well, Geoff, or in my mind, an excuse given, is that they don't feel they've got the support of their electorate. They tell us, oh yes, we're jolly clean on the climate, but not enough people are voting. You know, at the doorstep when we're doing our campaigning, nobody mentions it. We don't think we're getting the support that people actually want that. I think at the time, Geoff, you actually questioned that, and it's not the case. But actually, it is an excuse often given. Yeah, they love the climate and all that, but they don't want to lose their seat.
But my dad used to be a councillor, and he said no one ever says well done to a council. All they do is moan about like, why haven't I been being collected? Why have you like not mown the lawn? And actually it counts for a lot. Also, I think from a personal perspective, you know, if the transport cabinet officer gets like 3 nice emails from someone being like, thank you for implementing the school street, I really like it, you know, again, it's that like personal relationship, but also reminding them that there are people who care about it, and it's not just people aren't just only seeing the negatives. I'm gonna move us on towards the end of my slides. I think we've covered some of these things, but it's worth holding these in your mind. So the decisions that councils make are often influenced by a lot of things, such as the priorities of the administration. So what did they say they were going to do when they got elected, or are they part of like a major party such as Labour and Conservatives, and they've kind of got to toe the party line at a national level? Obviously, the resources they have, the appetite for a council to do new things, and I think that's a really important one, depending on your council makeup. You know, a big idea, a new idea is scary, and actually they need to kind of see other councils doing it, understand it, rather than kind of throwing it at them. Yeah, reputation we've covered, and whether there's opposition. And I think the reason I put this slide here and put these 2 columns is I think how you can see in this second column, the scorecards and the work that you guys do can help influence council's decision making, and also kind of well, I can't remember what the word is, but kind of link to these. So we can provide reliable information. So many councils simply do not have the funds, and if you can provide them with quite a decent analysis of like, this is where we think you are with climate action, this is what is missing, but more than that, we can say, do you want to do 20-mile-an-hour? Well, look, with a few clicks of the button on the scorecard site, I can show you the other councils in your area that have 20-mile-an-hour. So you're cutting down that work for them. We can offer inexpensive solutions. So not all these climate actions cost money, and I think that's really important to note. And maybe you want to look for a council that perhaps you know is not particularly wealthy, that has done some of these actions in the scorecards, and providing that. The scorecards, because we measure all councils, I think really help this idea of reassuring them that it's not such a big, bad, scary thing because other councils have done X action, but also encouraging that innovation and competition. So if one council has done it, well, maybe you could join them. Obviously helps councils look good. They get a good score in the scorecards. And only last week, I think it was, Barnet Council wrote a blog, you know, totally off their own back about, look how well we've done in the scorecards, and kind of like boosting their work in that way. And I also think that the other good thing about the scorecards, and which kind of what you can do, is you can work at both levels. So you can both talk to the officers and the staff members, but also the councillors, whether they're in power or the opposition ones, because they do all kind of talk to each other and influence each other in different ways. So my final kind of content heavy slide, and I wanted to try and kind of write this as diplomatically as possible. Not everyone will ever like the scorecards, partly because, you know, we're holding a light to what people are doing and highlighting the action or inaction. But I think we've kind of covered it here, and I kind of want to remind you of this. So Council Climate Action Scorecards are not just a climate thing, it's a transparency and benchmarking exercise. Councils are democratic institutions, and we think it's important that residents can understand quite easily what their council is doing on climate change, because it is, you know, a huge challenge for all of us to tackle. So it's worth thinking about, has the council provided this information on their site or somewhere? How can they provide it? We're flexible about what we can see, but just doing something is perhaps not enough, like providing that evidence, and that helps with engaging residents and kind of having wider effects. You might be doing something right. Can't remember what the quote is, but there's that quote about first they laugh at you, then they ignore you, and then they cheer you on. It's maybe not quite that, right? Or they shout at you somewhere in there. And it's hard, but, you know, in order to get change, you do need to recognize where the problems are and maybe have some of those slightly kind of awkward or difficult conversations to move things forward. Because if we all thought everything we were doing was perfect, then we wouldn't have done these scorecards. And we all know that there is work that needs to be done. And it's up for you guys to pick, you know, pick your battles of where you're going to work. I've said it before, but please provide the local nuance. We just simply can't know everything that happens with every council. We also don't know the relationships, right? So maybe you've got really committed councillors, but the officers are no good, or it might be vice versa. And it's really helpful that you can be like, I know why that project happened, because there was this councillor and he loved that thing and they did it. Therefore, I know I can get my councillor to do the next thing that's similar. But, you know, it really varies. And then finally, we are reviewing the methodology. We've got the final roundtables on governance and finance and planning this Thursday. So if you're interested in coming, I'll share the links after the call, and we could have maybe like one of you from each of the sessions. Also, if you're South or the councils, you know, this is kind of an easy get out clause for you guys, but like, unless you're a volunteer with us, like, you didn't write the scorecards, right? Like, and I don't want you to dismiss them, but you can kind of be diplomatic and tactical about what you say. And you can be like, yeah, I understand. Yeah, really badly marked in that section. Yeah, don't listen to them. Awful. But, you know, what about this section where you've done quite well? Or like, why do you want to learn from this bit? And do always encourage councils to contact us if they've got specific things they want to ask us about. And we are really keen to talk to councils. Maybe don't dismiss the whole section entirely, but, you know, use it to your advantage in whatever way that might be, with the scorecards. So in terms of what next, I guess I'll just summarize quickly to say, like, I hope that was useful, but I've kind of jumped around quite a bit from like what the scorecards showed, and then how you might want to use them, kind of some tips, and then a bit more detail on like how council decisions made and thinking about kind of emotions and like the realities of the scorecards and how you work with councils. I hope that has been useful and given you food for thought. And I think we add a lot of those extra slides in just because, like, we can't tell you perfectly how to get climate action to happen. Like, it's never as simple as that. But what we can do is provide a tool that benchmark councils and gives you some further information that you can build on to make those changes happen. So in terms of what we're up to next, and how you can get involved, we've got a conference happening on the 21st of March, which you'll all be very invited. You'll be very welcome to come along to in London. where we're launching our first analysis report. So we've worked with Amphesis to analyse the action scorecard results and work out what are some of the factors or characteristics of councils that lead to greater overall council scores. So do come along when we'll be launching that report, but also, I guess, we need to start telling groups is send that report to your councils, because it will be really interesting to provide not just like these are the results, but it's like, okay, what are the factors that have the best impact on their scores, and therefore where might they want to prioritize their work. I mentioned the remaining roundtables, ignore the one on the 22nd of February, that has gone. But that is the timing, 11 to 12:30 for the planning and land use and governance and finance. And then finally, I realized I didn't say it at the beginning, and I think sometimes I need to say it, otherwise people are like, oh, this is great work, but what are you doing? We plan to do the scorecards again, because we want councils, we want to bench, sorry, I was looking at the questions at the same time. We want councils to be able to see their progress, we hope, over time. So we're going to start later this year, and will be published hopefully in the next scorecards in summer 2025, as a way to benchmark how things are going. There's a few quick questions in the chat box. If you were, I think, a volunteer with us for definitely an auditor, it's free access to the conference, and if you're part of the local climate academy, it's free access too. I think I spoke to Sally and Geoff and said like there may be 1 or 2 complimentary tickets for South East Climate Action Alliance. I know you've helped us a lot with funding applications. If not, there's a kind of a sliding scale of tickets. I think one of them, the lower end, is kind of £10 or £20 for the day. And I think we are going to do questions.
Let me introduce Lucy, who from Rother District Council, who I met on one of the Climate Academy courses. And Lucy, tell us a bit about your experience, because you've been on the front line on this, and how's it gone?
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. So yes, I'm a Climate Strategy Officer at Rother District Council. And as Geoff said, we met at one of the climate academies. So I haven't prepared any slides or anything like that. I just thought I'd talk to you a little bit about my experience with the scorecards over the last sort of actually 18 months perhaps. Give a bit of context about Rother as well. And I'm sure maybe the eagle eyes of you would have spotted some of Rother's scores in Geoff's blog post as well. But to give some context, I joined Rother District Council 18 months ago. So it was really interesting, Annie, seeing your timeline of how this has developed. Because I wasn't a climate officer before. I worked previously at Kent Wildlife Trust. So I was new to local authority life, and I came along and I was given the task of updating Rother's climate strategy and crucially producing, because there wasn't one before, the climate action plan. So fresh in post 18 months ago, I wanted to do a bit of research, essentially looking at what other councils were doing, comparing that to what Rother were doing, seeing a bit of a gap analysis essentially. So I used the climate emergency previous scorecards, so the scorecards for the council plans. So that was actually my first introduction to this, and I found it really, really useful because I could really clearly see what was good, what councils were doing well, and from that I was able to put together, say, right, well, these are the gaps in Rother's existing plan, this is how we can make it stronger. To that, and then came along sort of autumn 2022, you released the first draft of the methodology for the action plans at the same time as I was starting Rother's action planning. So again, it was a really, really useful tool to build that action plan. We then got to the marking part, so we started receiving the freedom of information requests coming through as the first stage scoring was going on, and that's where we first got the indication that we knew that Rother weren't going to score particularly well. Sorry, my cat's now coming to get involved. It's because I started talking. She likes to, you know. So that was the first indication that we were like, right, okay, this is going to be a bit. We're not going to do as well. We know we're not going to do as well as we would like to do. I think I should probably point out, I think every climate officer in the country is doing this job because they want to take climate action. I don't think there's going to be many climate officers that don't really care about the climate that much. So it was, yes, it was an interesting time. So we knew that we knew that we weren't going to do particularly well, but we could see that, well, this is what we need to be doing. Essentially, this is how we can achieve that. And I'm really pleased, Annie, that you've said that you're doing the scoring again, because last time I spoke to Isaac, that wasn't confirmed, so I didn't know that. And one of the things that I have like held on to essentially is, well, actually, if we assess now today, it would be a very different score. But that's because of that process, because we've been able to see, well, actually, this is where we could be, as you say, some easy wins, but also some things take a long time to change, don't they? So it's some things really do. I've been trying to get a decision support tool, or I've been working through the process of introducing a new decision support tool. We now have that at Rother. I'm really pleased we've got that. It has taken over a year to do that. So yeah, some things do take longer than you would like them to do. So that's sort of the process, go through that. I actually still go on the website to this day quite regularly. I'd quite like to know what the analytics are from my from my domain, for things like, well, now the action plan's been approved and adopted, we're doing the delivery of creating more of these projects. It's a really nice resource for us to be like, okay, so we want to ban pesticides. We go and we can see which councils have already banned it. We can click through and we can read their cabinet reports. We can bring that information together. The evidence is sort of there as it is. So I found it quite a useful tool, yeah, to this day going forward. Other things that we've been involved with, we said about the Climate Academy, my colleague and I both attended that, which was really useful, and it's nice to see some familiar faces on here from that as well. I had put some challenges in here about my brief notes I was writing. There were nuance that we talked about earlier on that really local level. It is, obviously, the methodology exists. You need to have a methodology, you need to have a framework. We got a bit of flack. We got quite a lot of emails, particularly around things like, don't even have a climate officer. And now I'm a climate officer responding like, I do exist. It's a proportion of staff that are climate officers. It's a sort of explaining the methodology, but going through has been interesting. But yeah, so I think that's a whistle-stop tour. Overall, I think it's just been a really useful framework, particularly for where we were at Rother at the time. It felt like a very good time to be able to put those things into action plans and to put those things into strategies, because strategies are not updated every year. It just happened to be that we were updating ours at that time. So it was very useful, essentially. I could probably keep going, but I won't.
Thanks, Lisa. I think that's really heartening to hear that, actually. And I think the timing sounded it's just perfect for you, wasn't it? Because you weren't an incumbent, so you didn't immediately get defensive. And I think that's where one of the biggest problems is, from my experience, particularly with Horsham and West Sussex. Actually, once you start getting defensive, the learning game sort of comes to an end. But perhaps, Annie,
it would be quite easy to. I do feel very defensive of some of it. I try not to. I'm glad you don't see that too much, because as I do say, these are our projects that we're trying to deliver for the same reasons.
Well, let's take about another sort of 5-10 minutes maximum to sort of for a last round of questions. But who'd like to kind of raise their hand and either ask to Lucy for a comment or back to Annie?
I just want to sort of reflect back what I've heard. So many of the things are about building consensus, getting to people at the right time, with multi-tier authorities, working with those that understand the levels like parish and district and county. How I think in Ada, where I'm a councillor, we're going to have a change of group in May, I'd say almost certainly. And so how do we build consensus for a new group who've been in the opposition and they're suddenly going to have to take the reins of power? I'm worried about losing approximately 6 to 8 months worth of progress while they all work out what they're doing. We've got the election, which is going to slow everything down. Then we've got to get the new people in post. Then they've got to learn what they're doing. So has anyone got any top tips for that kind of transition?
A shameless plug, but we are going to be running the local climate academy for newly elected councillors. So if you encourage your councillors to go to that might be useful. And I don't know how your council works, but making sure that those councillors, do handover sessions with each other. And although a councillor may formally no longer be a councillor, if they are from the same party, it's probably quite likely that they are maintaining some sort of contact with the party and the new councillors and kind of supporting each other from behind the scenes. So that's useful. And again, kind of what we said in the slides, well, these scorecards are great, rather than them be like, okay, is the climate action plan any good? I don't know, like, what is Ada doing? You can be like, look, have a look at these scorecards. It might not be perfect, but it gives you a decent indication of where you're at and maybe where you might want to improve, or at least what questions to be asking. So like, why is it you've done so badly in building the heatings? Is it because there was no staff and actually you've done some great stuff? Or is it because that work actually just hasn't been done?
Good point. Any other kind of questions just to chip in at this stage? Sarah?
Just quickly, I've just I live in Rushmore Council, and I've shared a bit of practice with Sally actually, in that I went through the Rushmore schools and looked to see whether they achieved marks, and looked to see where they hadn't achieved marks, and then looked at the criteria and made a little chart saying, you scored this, the average was this is what you need to do, use based on the missing marks, and then moved on. So I've made it was very helpful to me in that I learned a lot about where the gaps were in Rushmore, but I need to now make it more simple, and I've actually sent it around to various Friends of the Earth people and councillors and Petersfield Climate Action Network and that sort of thing, and Sally. So, well, what do you think? And basically they all think it's too complicated and needs colour. And also I've just looked at the 15 things that Rushmore should be doing, and they are doing some of them. So they've done about 13 of the 15. So maybe I should just change that to 10. Possibly a good thing. So I'm just sharing my ideas, but I want to use this to make our councillors realise that we're in a climate emergency. And quite honestly, I know we've got councillors here, but our councillors are not really getting that at all, whatever side of the wherever they are. And I think it's because they want to appease voters. I mean, they're really stepping back from active travel. £2 billion for a cycle path, and nobody will cycle on it, and all that kind of stuff. You know, it's distressing.
Can I, on that point, let me just put a plug back in for the next knowledge sharing session, which is on this Britain Talks Climate kind of approach, where they've done something which I think is really interesting, which is they've got a pie chart based on a big survey, and it divides the population up into different segments, which ranges from the kind of activist campaigners through the most recalcitrant deniers. And it makes the kind of, when you think about it, the obvious point that depending where you sit on this, you have a totally different mindset, and therefore different messaging will work for you. And don't be surprised if the messaging for this group totally bounces off this group. And I think it could be a useful eye-opener for actually most climate campaigners to have some kind of structure to realise, and because councillors must be on the same spectrum, because they're not special in that regard. So I'll put another link into the sign-up thing, but it's I think it's going to be a good one, and it certainly made me think a lot when I glanced at it.
Just to respond to you, Sarah, I think it's useful that exercise you've done, and now the other exercise to think about is like, okay, well, what's winnable? You know, what does Rushmore Council care about? Maybe it's not travel, and you know, doing that graph of like, what is you think winnable, but what is also impactful, and prioritizing, because sending someone like 10 pages, like these are all the things you need to do, is a lot. So maybe picking a particular section or 3 things. You know, is there an active campaigning group on a particular topic, so it's worth kind of jumping on that? Or do you know that a particular councillor, you know, really cares about nature, and maybe you focus there? So it's using that evidence and then the local situation to kind of work out where we can join the dots and work together, and start there. I would say, like, we are in a climate emergency and everything needs to change, but you can't change everything. So picking like which bits that can be part of that change.
That sounds like a great bit of advice to finish with. So let's wrap up, and let me say, Annie, that was really, really great to have you talk us through this. And I think let's all do a round of applause here to thank you for the fantastic work that your gang's doing.
Well, thanks for having me, and thanks Lucy as well. I haven't heard kind of your story, so it's lovely to hear as well.
Yeah. Well, thanks everyone, and we'll stay tuned with this. You've got an active audience, Annie, for the next rounds of this, and let's see this go. And I'm guessing everybody's signed up to the SECA newsletter, but I think that's it. Let's end the recording and say thank you very much and good night.
Thanks, Annie.
Very much. That was really good. Really good. Thanks very much. Bye.